I don't normally do this, but I think it's only fair to issue a warning right at the beginning of this video. If you stand on the table of your LGS or the hood of your own car and scream phrases like, "as the creators intended," or "in the flesh and blood," until passersby look at you with great concern, this video is not going to be one that you enjoy very much. But I encourage you to sit back, put that emotion aside, and listen to what I have to say, because I think it might be important. Let's go. The Flesh and Blood trading card game has experienced far more popularity than its indie TCG companions. Things like MetaZoo tried to target collectability, art, and, chase in their boxes, while Flesh and Blood ran circles around the cryptid trading card game company by saying we're about one thing and one thing only. We're all about that gameplay. And being all about that gameplay is great, but being the most competitive trading card game in the indie sphere has some downfalls to it. That's right, everyone hold on to your butts. We're going to talk about some flaws of Flesh and Blood today. I know, grip tight. But I think that Talishar, the online platform for playing Flesh and Blood, not only alleviates some of these challenges and flaws that we see, but is in part, at least partially responsible for the continued success and, small growth that we've seen Flesh and Blood have over Talishar's existence. So today, we're going to talk about the Flesh and Blood landscape, what it looked like when Talishar was introduced, why Talishar was so needed, and we're also going to explain what Talishar does that paper Flesh and Blood currently cannot. That's right. Right now, today, Talishar is achieving things that paper, Flesh and Blood simply cannot. But to understand the Talishar platform and its impact on the game, we have to know what Flesh and Blood looked like when Talishar came out. Now, I couldn't find anything really concrete online, but after posting in the Talishar Discord, I believe it was one of the project's creators that gave me the answer that Talishar was released in August of 2021. Now, this was a pivotal time for Flesh and Blood. Flesh and Blood was coming off the Monarch release, and all of us know how well that went. Monarch was the release where major retailers were accused of and frankly guilty of holding back products, selling products at overinflated prices, and creating scarcity in something that was, and it's probably too much of it was printed. So this was this false sense of scarcity. So prices rose and prices fell. And Monarch is one of those times where a lot of people got to hear about Flesh and Blood and maybe got not so great of a taste in their mouths. The next set to be released was Tales of Aria. So that came out in September of the same year, right after Talishar. So Tales of Aria, it was hype. It came with the Vegas Calling and the preview event, but it didn't come without its own series of controversies. Tales of Aria was the Duskblade ban timeline where people's cold foils that they had just recently pulled were rendered, invalidated, and Briar was running rickshaw over every competitive meta, limited and constructed. So this was a pivotal time for Flesh and Blood, and along comes this online platform, Talishar. Now, Talishar hit at what I would argue is the perfect timeline. Legend Story Studios had recently declared that we were going to move away from online skirmishes. Online skirmishes were fantastic. It was a great way for us to gather in a pandemic era and still play a game that we had come to love. But as we started to disband these pods, it felt like the Flesh and Blood community went from this ravenous, gigantic mass of people to dispersed individual pods of players all around the world. And several people found themselves, a country without a home, if you will. It was like they had nowhere to play. And if they did have somewhere to play, well, a lot of these places aren't exactly new player friendly. We mentioned before, Flesh and Blood is the most competitive indie trading card game, and with that comes the fact that the better player will almost always win. I know myself, learning the game, I lost like 26 games in a row to my buddy John just trying to learn the game. It's not always the most new player friendly, and couple that with the fact that the game takes a big financial investment because let's just say it. Flesh and Blood is not Magic the Gathering. There's not millions of players. So to play Commoner, to play some of these more affordable formats, you have to find a large enough group of people willing to play them. And with online communities disbanded and people playing, locally and at their armories, there wasn't really as many people willing to play those formats. And speaking of armories at the time were treated like training grounds. Everyone was trying their net decks or their secret tech that they were bringing to the calling. It was very competitive, and none of these are conducive for the new player. But again, as we said earlier, along comes Talishar, and this does a couple things for the Flesh and Blood community. First, it bolsters the competitive players and gives them an edge and gives them a chance to jam games and get a bunch of data. And spoiler alert, on this channel, I don't care about competitive players. I'm going to rob Peter to pay Paul here a little bit. Competitive scene and competitive players are healthy. They're doing great. They love the game. They don't need more attention from us, from our design, or for things that we want from the game. So I'm going to kind of set them aside and let them go. What it did for the regular enthusiasts is it gave them a chance to find out if they liked Flesh and Blood. They could build any hero, they could use any card they want without making the initial financial investment. They could do it easier. Yes, I know you could always do this. You could print proxies, whatever, but it's much easier just to click, drag, build a deck, and play the game. And it also gave them a rules engine. We see this with Magic Arena. We see this with other popular online games. A rules engine is imperative because at the beginning, you might not understand why things happen the way they do, but as a new player, it's nice that the game just drives and you could find some enjoyment. You could ping a friend, you could both build decks on fabtcg or whatever your database of choice was back in that day, and you could play the game. Now, this is before Talishar was super big, so people were doing this, but not in greater numbers. We saw the numbers pick up, however, with the release of Uprising. We kind of went through the Starvo winter. We're not gonna address that. People used Talishar then, but we made it through the Starvo winter. We get through into Uprising, and we see a set release where Talishar is in the community mind. And what this means is, as a set releases, players can finally experience what is one of the most fun aspects of any Flesh and Blood release. And that's just trying the new heroes. Yes, right now, the most recent set release is Outsiders. And yes, right now, it seems like Riptide feels like trash. But if you log on to Talishar right now, there is tons of Riptide games happening as we speak. It is a platform that gives players the availability to try new fun heroes and cards that won't make the competitive scene, they won't make the competitive meta, but we have a spot to play them and experience that flavor and fall in love with the game. Now, Talishar, I believe right now, is solely responsible for this. I don't believe there's many for fun games of Flesh and Blood going on in the world at any given time. There might be a couple here and there, and yes, I know you in the comment section, you're going to tell me that you play for fun all the time, but you have to take my word for it. It's not something that happens that frequently. And speaking of things that don't happen that frequently, subscribe to this new channel. We have 30 some odd subscribers. We already reached 30. We're racing to 100. So click that sub button if you like the vibe around here. So as Uprising comes out and we are able to use Talishar to experience some of these new heroes, we get the community kind of making a claim that we don't like Talishar because it gives our competitive players an edge. It gives them this vast amount of data. But what it does, the positive in my mind outweighs the negative, the ability to experience these cards. And as we move into something fun like Dynasty after Uprising, we see Talishar pick up in steam. A lot of these cards from Dynasty aren't going to make a huge competitive impact. But on Talishar, we have a place to play them. And speaking of that, we have short printed cards that are crazy expensive. They're hard to come by, but guess what? On Talishar, we get to use them. We get to jam those cards and play classes we otherwise couldn't without serious financial investment. Now, this also builds these smaller sub-communities that I claimed were hard to find. Remember Commoner, the way to play Flesh and Blood? Every time I say Flesh and Blood is expensive, everyone says, well, what about Commoner? Yes, well, you have to find people to play Commoner against. And with something like Talishar, you absolutely can find people to play Commoner against. Now, you always had things like Tabletop Simulator and webcam games, but again, it's just simpler. It's a rules engine, and it's more conducive to new players to play a deck that feasibly they could go on TCG Player or even on MinMax Games right now and buy every card to build out that deck. So Talishar kind of takes us through Uprising, and then we get to the release of Outsiders. And Outsiders spoiler season is crazy, but the cards are available on Talishar a week early, and there's complaints, and major members of the community say, hey, we don't think this is great. But do you know what it did more than give competitive Team Ascent the ability to practice early and get down the meta? What it did is it got regular enthusiasts, people who aren't the most competitive people who aren't going to win the World Championship or the Pro Tour or whatever it is, the chance to play with new cards. We're playing Riptide games. People were playing Azuri games and pummeling Pursuit of Knowledge super early and making crazy fun plays. And for that reason, Talishar creates an inclusive and conducive environment for the new player and for the casual enthusiast. And this is a place where Paper, Flesh and Blood as a whole falls short currently. So because of this, as we see the growth, I don't think Fab would be where it is right now without a platform like Talishar. And in fact, I don't think Fab can grow without a platform like Talishar. I've made it very clear in any Flesh and Blood video I've ever made across any channel that I've ever been on that I believe you have to have a casual community. You have to have people who want to play your game for fun, for more than just to win. And to do that, you're going to need a place for those people to gather and play. And I want to address a concern really quick before we go on. I really think this isn't going to make people not go to the armory. I think it's, the alternative. I think people, again, aren't going to go crazy and bring their high power level decks and use the armory as their training grounds for the next big thing, but rather they're going to use Talishar for that, find like-minded people to play test against, gather that data, and maybe turn that armory into a friendly experience where we try fun things and it gets more of a Friday night Magic feel where, the games are going on. There is a winner and there is a loser, but it is a super fun environment. But I want to hear from each and every one of you. I know that this is a divisive topic. Some people think Talishar is not great for Flesh and Blood. I hope today that I've showed you that not only Talishar is great for Flesh and Blood, but it is required. Flesh and Blood needs something like Talishar. They should embrace it. And I know as a member of the community, I embrace Talishar and everything that they've done. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out again. If you haven't yet, click the subscribe button. We're racing to 100 subs already over here. Thank you all so much for hanging out. Until next time, you all know me. My name is Josh. And maybe on this channel, I got to come up with a different sign off. I don't know. Let me know what you think. We'll see you soon. Goodbye.